So I think what I want to do first is just go over the difference between independent and dependent as adjectives. What do they describe, and your experience, what do you think of when you hear the word independent? So, just any general ideas are encouraged, just what comes to mind, go for it. Yes, Ash?
Independent people act on their own. They don't need someone else to help them.
Right, so independent, acting on your own. Now, does anyone have another way of describing the word independent? Yes, Lisa?
Freedom to do whatever you want.
Right, freedom. All right, so now let's compare that with dependent, which is a little bit different. So when you talk about someone depending on someone else, or something being dependent, or if I say, I don't know if I can come to the movie today, it depends. What does that normally mean? Yes, Savannah?
You're waiting for somebody else to do something?
Right, so you're waiting on something else. You are relying on something else. So there's a kind of reliance, right? Like maybe something that's dependent, it won't happen until something happens before it, right? So I'd like to first just go to an example, right? So you guys, do you depend on your parents in your opinion for certain things?
Yeah.
So what kinds of things?
Like food.
Take me places.
Right, so
House.
I don't think you guys can drive yet, and maybe you don't cook all of your meals yet on your own. So in that case, you are acting as dependent. But if, your parents can do those things on their own, right? So they don't always ask you for help in driving them places. So in that case, they are independent. And that is exactly how it works in a science experiment. When you have a dependent variable in an experiment, it means that something must happen first before this other change can happen. So what I want to do now is give you an example of a scientific experiment that requires independent versus dependent variables. So, for instance, if I want to stop using gasoline in my car, I'd rather use a different alternative fuel like biodiesel, which is very good for the environment. I want to make sure it's good for the environment. So what I'm going to do is I have 5 different petri dishes, each with 20 seeds in them, and I'm going to pour different amounts of biodiesel in each to see if the seeds are able to grow. And what I want to see is if the seeds grow a lot, then maybe this biofuel is really a good thing for the seeds' growth and for the environment. What do you guys think is the independent variable in this case? So the thing that you are doing differently for each of these petri dishes. So yes, what are you changing between each of them? What are you doing to these? Yes, Abby?
You're changing the amount of fuel that you put in a petri dish?
Yes, of course. So amount of fuel. And you guys have an idea about dependent variable. So what is happening if, once you add the biofuel to each, what is changing? What is changing as a result? What's the effect of that? What are you looking for when you're observing afterwards? Yes, Savannah?
The rate of plant growth.
Right, so that is a perfect way of describing it, rate of plant growth, right? So how many, not only how many seeds are growing, but mainly, do you see a lot of sprouting happening? Are these seeds still able to grow after all that biofuel? All right, so I'm going to teach you a quick cheer to help you remember the difference between independent and dependent variables, just because sometimes it can get confusing to remember the difference between the two. All right, so repeat after me. Here we go. If I do something to an experiment.
If I do something to an experiment.
What kind of variable is it?
What kind of variable is it?
Independent.
Independent.
Right, so you remember that because if I do something, then this is independent. Now, if something happens as a result, what kind of variable is it?
No.
Something happens as a result. What kind of variable is it?
Awesome. Dependent.
Dependent.
Which is which?
Which is which?
Don't say it just depends.
Don't say it just depends.
The one you adjust is independent.
The one you adjust is independent.
And the dependent changes in the end.
And the dependent changes in the end.
Awesome! Good job, guys! Do you think that'll help?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.